Reason we are here is a very mundane topic, but I felt, okay, let's do this. I think in talking with a lot of you over time, there's a lot of subjects out there, or a lot of things that are being done that have always been done a certain way. And even though there may be science to show that it works, it doesn't work. Some of the stuff just sticks. And so I get back to this idea of, and there's probably two main things. One is putting ice on injuries. And there's obviously a context and a timing and how windows of opportunity, but also doing things like cold water immersion for recovery. We see the cold tubs all the time. And if anything, it looks like more of a mental strength or mental toughness type thing. Like, you got to do this. This is part of the process. But are these things being done correctly? And do they provide value? And in what situations do they provide value? So, if you want to talk about a sort of a rehab or injury management, we'll start with that, but then I want it to branch off into some of these other areas. We've even seen, like, the new technology, the cryosauna, and people, putting themselves in these things and saying, "Oh, I feel fantastic. Like, my nipples are frozen, but, I feel fantastic aside from that." So we'll start it off with, let me just hold on here. I'm just going to make sure everybody's kind of muted, and then we'll start it off. So mute all, and then we'll start with Rob, just from and then some of the other physical therapists are going to jump in as well. But let's start with Rob. And I mean, when you work, say, with new therapists, and you guys are looking at techniques and all that, what role does ice play from an injury point of view, whether it's immediately after the injury or even the duration over the treatment of the injury? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two points of view with it. There, even some physicians we work with don't want to use ice because you want the inflammatory process to occur, because that promotes healing. If you think of things like dry needling, if you think things like Panariello where you inject almost like a sugar water into a tendon, you're trying to create an irritability so that you kickstart that inflammatory response. And if you use ice and stuff, the argument is that you're going to decrease the effectiveness of that inflammatory response. You have two factors from my perspective in regards to what happens with the injury or the surgery. You have this inflammatory response and you have edema, right? And so you have to look at the circulatory system and you have to look at the lymphatic system. The circulatory system has a pump in regards to the heart. The lymphatic system, its pump to me is just muscle contraction, right? And movement. And thus, if you're in so much pain or you have so much edema that you can't move well, or the system is shut down, muscles are shut down, it has an effect on one of these systems. And so I like using ice because, one, just to make the patient comfortable so I could do something with them, all right? Two is, and then if they're in less pain and they have movement and they're able to fire muscles, they're able to get more of a participation, for lack of a better term, of the lymphatic system, and both systems working together. What also happens with ice is, after a period of time where you have vasoconstriction or blood flow slows down, there's something called Hunning's reaction, where there's a vasodilation and an increase in blood flow. And not many people talk about that. They just talk about the effect of slowing down blood and affecting the inflammatory in that way. So I like using it. I've used it all my life. I haven't had any negative effects to it. If you don't use it, I don't know if anyone's ever proven that it's better not to use ice. The other thing is that we know pain and edema are inhibitors, right? They're noxious stimuli that shut down things. They'll shut down muscle. They'll prevent movement or those types of scenarios. And thus, though if you don't use ice and you don't restrict this blood flow, and the argument is that you're allowing inflammation to do what it does, promote this healing response, pain and edema, also a lot of bad things happen with that, but also. So from a rehab perspective, you can go back and forth.
Yeah, one thing Okay. One thing that I remember as an athlete, I did a lot of long jump, triple jump. So I plyos. So I had a lot of patellar tendon issues, like in terms of just pain and irritation. And you know, they give you you go to the trainer, you get the ice cup, and you're doing this. But I mean, in my opinion, it didn't really help. It just, you know, it helped for that half an hour or maybe another half hour after that. But I never found that it was part of the solution.
Yeah,
Um,
there's no silver bullet. I mean, it's part of a process, right? So you may say, listen, I'm gonna do this ice cup and I'm gonna get your pain down, and you know, do I need to do some soft tissue on the area? Is something jacked up, as people would say? A lot of people are believers in eccentric exercises for tendonitis, tendinosis. So does it help you to eliminate these noxious stimuli so you can start to exercise, which is going to be the key to reducing that patella tendinosis or tendonitis? It's just part of, it's not the silver bullet. We're going to ice and you're done. I mean, there's no silver bullet out there in anything, whether it's rehab or training. So if they just gave you an ice cup and they told you rub for half an hour and then you're done, I think that's a disservice, to be frank.
yeah. Dean, I wanted to bring you into this as well, but in terms of in terms of your regular practice, you know, I don't see a lot of ice in your clinic, but are you telling people that this is something maybe they can do at home? You know, and are you giving them specific guidelines for when it's applicable? Oh, sorry. We're just going to unmute you there, Dean. Sorry. I'm trying to unmute you, but I can't hear. Can you? There you go.
There we go. Yeah, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks again for doing this, Derek. Happy Sunday to everyone. Yeah. So I'm just gonna circle back to what Rob was saying. So the inflammatory. I think I don't want to get too deep into this, but I think we've all studied the physiological cascade reaction with an inflammatory process. But I consider the first 48 to 72 hours after a sprain or some sort of strain or trauma to be highly imperative that the body just undergo its natural processes. It's geared and designed to reduce the injurious state. Okay, so I don't get too crazy with my inflammatory protocols within the first couple days with ice. But what I do get crazy about is making sure they have compression. So everyone's probably heard of RICE or price therapy. I actually, pound for pound, find compression to be far more effective than the effects of ice. Now, I'm going to talk about something else that Rob talked about, the Hunting's reaction here. We know it's roughly about 20 minutes of ice application, solid ice application. I agree. I don't think this is talked about enough. And the problem we have with ice, if you will, is it's not a magic bullet. No, it's not, but it can be helpful in contextually if it's prescribed with certain context. So one of them being frequent applications. I like the early stages after the first 72 hours to be frequent. And I simply view an ice pack as a TENS machine. And I view a TENS machine as an ice pack. They work more or less the same way on the nervous system. So if I'm icing, I don't know if any one of you have heard about Janet Travell, and her trigger point work that she's done in this myofascial work. She described in detail a technique called stretch and spray. And back when we didn't care about the ozone layer, we used to use fluorocarbon. Rob, you may remember this, so the old stray and stretch. Now I'm a massage therapist. That was my first degree I got. I did this a ton, and I did it a ton because I got good reactions with it. I still occasionally will do ice and stretch now along a patterned, there's various patterns that you got to sweep and move in and stretch in, but I find it very useful to distract the neurological system. It acts as a counter irritant, truly, is what it does. So it definitely has its place, as does a TENS machine, as does any sort of tool within the rehab protocol. But like you were alluding to, Derek, you never really found much use for it. I'm going to bet that the therapists you were working with weren't giving you great direction with it.
Yeah, it was just sort of like, this is something you can do, right? Like on your own when you're not, So it just after a while, I kind of like, oh, this isn't doing anything for me, so I kind of wrote it off. But
Except getting you cold.
yeah, yeah. Well, and then some people, I'd even see cases where people would leave ice on too long and would have actual skin damage and frostbite
Burn.
type thing. Yeah, yeah, burns.
You
Yeah,
can burn I've seen it. You can burn yourself with ice just as much as you can with heat.
yeah. You had mentioned price. What is that? Is that where you give somebody rice and you charge them for it?
That's exactly right.
Sorry, I had to say that.
Oh,
Okay, so we're gonna change lanes here, and we're gonna get Erik Korem and maybe some of the strength and conditioning people, Brian, Chris. What are your thoughts on using like cold water immersion and ice baths? Like that seems to be part of the culture now, and I don't know if it's. We'll get Erik to jump in first here, but I don't know if that's just part of this. Like, we're doing all this great stuff, and it looks uncomfortable, so it's part of our culture or whatever, or is it actually useful in your experience, Erik?
Do you mind if I hop in on the previous question?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I don't want to buttonhole
So,
you.
I mean, I'm a physiology nerd, and so I'm always reading. I don't know if you guys follow the Weiss Institute at Harvard, but they have it's almost $1 billion institute based off of research in biotensegrity, and they just came out with a great paper. This came out a few weeks ago, and we're not going to go into all the physiology and stuff, but basically they discuss like macrophages' roles in the inflammatory process and how these macrophages are pro-inflammatory at the beginning. They release different cytokines that are antimicrobial, and actually they promote the regeneration of new muscle tissue. So these macrophages flip from M1s to M2s. Okay, M1s are the pro-inflammatory. M2s reduce inflammation and promote the maturation of the muscle cells. So what they're doing is they're using something called interleukin-4 to kind of speed this up. Here's the thing, though. They were talking about if you disrupt this process, you basically prevent the anti-inflammatory pieces of macrophages. So what I've been, this is something that I talk to our trainers a lot about, is like, how the body is designed and geared to handle these situations. Now, Rob, I'm so glad you brought up the lymphatic system, because you got to speed up the process in which we get rid of edema, either through compression or muscle pumping. But I think oftentimes we don't try to. There's a really great therapist, Brian Muir, who I had come and work with our athletes. And the whole therapy paradigm that they use is how do we move fluid in and out and let the inflammatory process how do we speed it up? How do we get the good fluid in, the bad fluid out? And so the more research you look at, even like lipid mediators of inflammatory process, we want these things to work. And so now let's go back to the post-training thought process. Okay, when we train, there's micro trauma, right? There's microinflammation. Do we want to inhibit that process as well? My argument is no. During the training process, I think we let the body do what it's supposed to do. Now, maybe after a game, there's multiple reasons you may want to. It's hard to bring yourself down after a football game. You're really excited, hyped up. And so we actually found that with our players, we put them in a cold tub after the game. It's like an overstimulation, and then they can relax and go to sleep. I know Dave Tenney's got some great stuff that he showed back when he was with the Sounders. I think it's overused. I think you use it as a bullet. You only have so many bullets in the chamber. I'm going to use them when I need them most, when it's going to make a guy feel good, maybe the day before a game or right after a game. I think you can overuse it, and you're inhibiting the natural adaptation process.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Erik. We'll jump back to the recovery question. I'm going to get Tracy to jump in as well. Tracy, you seem to be around snow a lot when you're working with these athletes. Like, how do they respond to using ice, or what's the context there for you?
Well, the snow really doesn't affect anything. What I would say is for me personally, working in a rehab setting, I would try to keep the mindset of regeneration and recharging. And so I try to dissuade people who are outside of super acute stages from habitually using ice, and try to help my colleagues maybe use movement and compression and the pool. I would either use contrast pools or just normal temperature to maybe even slightly warm pool to facilitate movement, to help things move along, to keep the mindset and the joint feeling good, the compressive, the hydrostatic aspect of the water. And just really, I just see the ice bags on the knees and the shoulders, just too much, too easy to do, habitual. The athletes get dependent on that, and they're not proactive with their sort of recharging themselves and really understanding the power of good movement. So I tried to really steer people from those, particularly the knee people, because it would kill me to see someone come in, we do all this good work, and then slap a bag of ice on the knee and they walk out with a flex knee with a shitty gait. And we just undid everything we just tried to do, and you're in month 3 of your ACL rehab, and we just reinforced those horrible gait mechanics because you put an ice bag on your knee. And that it's like, okay, we're back in 1987. And so I this is a topic that I kind of enjoy, because we have to be very judicious about how we, help the athlete understand what's going on. And like you said, they can use it on their own. They can use the little ice cup stuff. We can use it in super acute situations. But this kind of like habitual, let's get the ice bags out, and it's time for that to move on. At least.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I know when I was an athlete, which was about 87, thank you. The idea, like putting the ice on and then walking, I felt very almost brittle. Like
Yes.
it was just weird. Like, and I'm like, I don't feel better from this. And then and then I'm part Chinese. So like the Chinese are always like, stay away from cold. Like, oh, there's a cold draft, right? Like that's bad. And so I had this sort of built in my head as well. So I haven't seen a lot of positive things personally from putting ice on something. So I'm very interested at the alternatives that people have mentioned, the compression, the movement, maybe using some modalities to create that circulation. Does anybody else have any comments on that, just in terms of the use of the ice pack? Rob?
Yeah, Derek. Yeah, I agree with Tracy, and what I think what I'm just trying to describe, and I think what everybody is alluding to, is this is the acute phase, right? So we're trying to create an environment. First of all, if you put ice on somebody for 10, 15 minutes and they get numb, you are not eliminating the inflammatory process, right? When that person leaves, the inflammatory process is still going on. You may avoid some meds and stuff like that, but the inflammatory process is still going on. You're trying to create an environment so movement can occur, whether it's movement of a joint, whether it's walking more comfortably, whether it's firing a muscle, whether it's being able to do manual techniques so they don't hurt as much to push some of that fluid out. You'll have physicians, and I'm sure everybody's either witnessed it or heard of it, when you have a really badly swollen joint, they'll drain it, and the patient is much more comfortable after they drain that knee or whatever, usually it's a knee, and they're much more comfortable. And those noxious stimuli effects of edema or the pain that have been reduced allow this better movement, this better gait, allow a better muscle firing, contraction, things like that. I agree with Tracy. I think when you're down the road and you're 3 months post-op and there's nothing going on, I agree with what she's saying there. From my perspective, I just want to be clear. I'm talking about acute phases of an injury and trying to get people to start the movement patterns and put them in an environment that's most apt for them to be successful in those types of things.
There was a great story that Charlie Francis had told me about when he was in LA before the Olympics. There was a German shot putter who rolled their ankle on the toe board. And he said the therapist, the German therapist, went right in and just taped it up and compressed it, and then took a syringe to try to pull the swelling out, the blood, the edema out, and it popped the plunger off it. But that athlete, because they jumped on it so quickly and did that, that was throwing the next day and competing the next day with no ill effects. Which, I always go back to that story. I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. As far as the recovery aspects and, creating some sort of flush or, maybe even using contrast, have people had success with that? Ice immersion, putting people in tubs. Is that a psychological thing, or do people, it seems like the research is all over the map, but Erik, did you want to start on that?
Yeah, I would say it's a laziness thing. I've been in environments where, especially during training camps, it's a filler time. It's like a way to fill time. You know what I'm saying? Where they'll go, oh, we're going to recover now. So at one very prominent school, they just said, all right, we're going to go 10 minutes in the cold tub, 10 minutes in the hot tub. And then that was just kind of it. Or every day after training, everybody's getting in the cold tubs. And it's like, we're recovering now. And there's so many other things that we should be doing to normalize tissue, to bring the parasympathetic system back into play. It's just laziness, and just old school thinking of, ice is the way to fix it. That's really, I think it's just undereducation as well. And if you're going to use that, I would choose to use it in a time where it's going to make somebody feel better right before a competition. So if it's something where like, it's just going to make them feel better, sometimes you just got to make somebody feel like they're ready to go. And if 7 or 8 minutes in an ice tub right before a major competition the night before is what it is, it's what it is. But on a daily use, I just find it to be laziness.
Yeah. Like, Brian, what is your experience with that? Is it kind of just a placebo in many ways? Like it's a symbolic effort that we're doing something?
It's definitely a placebo effect.
Sorry, just a little, your connection's a little.
Placebo as well,
there. Sorry, Brian. Brian, sorry, we didn't hear you there.
I agree with what Erik and Robert said. It's a lazy way of handling some stuff. The way that we used it this year was days that were really, really humid. We'd have guys get in cold tubs for 5 minutes, because we would always go lift right after. And because of our renovations, our weight room was in indoor penitentiary that was more humid, more hot than what they just came from outside. So we wanted to get them something to just cool their body temperature down a little bit before we sent them into, the gates of hell, so to speak. So that was how we did it. Whether the science supports it or not, our players definitely appreciated that, going over a 3-hour block of work. So that's most recently how we've used it.
Yeah. Erik, you want to jump in on that, on just the cooling? Like if you're in really difficult, hot conditions, what has been your experience with that?
100%. I just wrote a little note to everybody, like flash cooling is what I call it. Like, so if you're training in a really hot, humid environment, people, especially like in a training camp session environment where athletes are supposed to, practice and they got these narrow windows to eat, just 2 or 3 minutes to cool them down, I found has helped with appetite. And that's a big problem in training camps, is guys don't want to, or athletes don't want to eat because they're really hot and they're uncomfortable. So yeah, Brian, I think that's a great idea. It's just a flash cooling.
That's what it was.
Yeah, help them feel better. Or if an athlete, I've seen, if an athlete is a very parasympathetic dominant type of athlete, and it takes a little something to get going. Every once in a while, I've said, hey, drop in a cold tub, get out, and then, then we'll warm up and get training, and it kind of alerts them. So those type of things, it's just, yeah, 100% agree with that.
But there's an individualization aspect to it as well. It seems like you're saying there, like some people respond, some people maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think you need to create avenues for people instead of just bucketing everybody in one general area. You got to figure out what makes them tick and what's going to help them. But especially, I have a lot of experience like in the deep, like down south, like in Florida and Houston, where it was just brutally hot. A few minutes to cool them down, and they're going to want to eat. Otherwise, they just have this feeling like they don't want to eat, and then they waste feeding and refueling opportunities.
Have people had much experience and success with contrast, like Tracy was saying, like contrast, whether it's even like being in a sauna, like using hot and then putting people back and forth between hot and cold? Does anybody have any profound experience with that? Erik?
Yeah, we use sauna a lot, dry sauna. I've had a lot of positive responses from that. There's good things for the soft tissue. We actually, Mark McLaughlin gave me what he calls the ultimate protocol, and a lot of our players like to do it after the day of a game, and it just really, really relaxes them. But it's a contrast of extreme heat with like neutral temperatured water, and then like a little bit of cold. But really what it's doing is just kicking the parasympathetic system back on and just helping them relax. But I think heat is something that's undervalued. Dry saunas are huge tools, especially after long flights. Like a lot of the track athletes I used to work with, I would like find a hotel with a sauna and get in it as soon as you get there. And we were just finding different, because we would measure things that I get made fun of for a lot on here. And we find that those things would improve markedly, and then they would feel better. So after long haul flights.
Okay, so that's a good point. So let's flip it. Like Rob, what's your experience with using heat?
Well, I like using heat in regards to if I want to make tissue more pliable before I'm going to work on it. Okay, I like using heat. That's probably just about the only scenario I use heat now in my career. I don't use ultrasound anymore. Generally, honestly.
Yeah.
But I do use hot packs as a superficial way to try to make, tissue more pliable before I work on it. Essentially, just to go back to what we were talking about real quick. I was in the Soviet Union. They were really big, and this is in the 80s. They were really big on contrast and recovery and so forth. And at the time, I was at St. John's. And a question I'll put out there, and especially to you, Erik, is this. I agree with you. I think there are different methods we can use via, whether it's movement or other things, to assist in recovery. If you just had your athletes say, look, you have to shower anyway. If they did hot and cold in the shower, which did not take away from your time of recovery, do you think that would still be as effective, or no, you definitely need an ice tub? You definitely need, those types of things.
We don't have that here at William & Mary.
Right.
We don't have an ice tub or a cold tub or a hot tub. And so the athletes that I'm learning how they respond, some of them need a little bit of that. Because I don't just look at the contrast therapy as a way to, some people look at like moving fluid. I look at it as a stimulation.
I agree.
And some people need that stimulation, and that stimulation facilitates relaxation, or it facilitates some type of event down the line. But I use the Omega Wave, and I look at their heart rate variability, and some of these guys are consistently parasympathetic. So I will use a temperature regulated method to put them in an environment where they feel more alert. And if somebody's very sympathetic dominant, if they're extremely sympathetic, I'm not going to put them in an ice tub, because now I'm going to create a more sympathetic environment. I want to kick the parasympathetic system back on. So then I'll say, hey, we're going to do something that's more movement-based, bike, extensive med ball circuit at a very low tempo to initiate cardiac vagal tone. So I try not to give out broad prescriptions. I look at the person, try to get to know them, how they're responding, how they respond to training, and then provide the method.
Yeah, I know Rob mentioned going back to my 80s college career. I think those were the two big things, Rob, that I was being treated with was, here's the ice, and then I want you to take the ultrasound and do it on yourself. And so it was really good quality of care. And in both cases, like I still had knee pain. But, Dean, what are your thoughts on that? We talk about ultrasound a bit here and there.
Yeah.
And the one joke was that sometimes the ultrasound wasn't plugged in, like it wasn't plugged into the wall, and people.
And you got a better effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a better effect. Yeah. Bring me back to that in 1 sec. I want to jump back quickly. I got something to say about the contrast bathing or applications. So part of my degree in massage therapy was hydrotherapy. and we learned a lot about cryotherapy and thermal application. So how we were taught, and it's still ongoing trend here, you got to look at there's two things, and I'm really glad Erik and Rob, you pointed it out. What are we trying to do here? Okay, so ice is just a modality. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to reduce pain, which is an inhibitory effect, especially to the MSK system? Are we trying to move fluid? Are we trying to get fluid out? We all know that fluid shuts down muscle function. That's it. 4 milliliters on the knee, VMO starts shutting down. So what are we trying to do? Now, we were taught that the integumentary system, or your skin, think of it like a radiator. And someone was talking about it earlier, about the ability to move fluid. So when you heat, obviously it's bringing fluid out into the integumentary system. It's your radiator. It's your cooling system, right? That's where we go to cool down. And when you move fluid to the outside and the integumentary system, you're going to cool your inner core. So you can shunt that back in locally with cool. So in chronic conditions, it's been proven that there's massive, well, I shouldn't say it massive because I'm not going to be able to back all of that up. But there's benefit with exudate. And Erik's going to be able to talk to this better than me because I'm not the resident physiologist here. But you're moving exudate. You're helping with recovery, if you will, by getting that pump system. You can do it with your muscles. You can also do it with contrast. And actually, my experience with contrast has been pretty decent in chronic situations of inflammation. Acute, no, I wouldn't do contrast. I'm not going to bring a heated environment into an inflamed area anyway. But just getting back to ultrasound now, there's something, I don't know if you guys have heard of shortwave diathermy. It's not used very much anymore. But I'll tell you what, you want it, and Rob, I've got extensive use with ultrasound. I use a product and called an autosounder made by Chattanooga. Okay. Now these guys, ultrasound, I knew way back in 05, 06, that ultrasound had many benefits, but the main benefit that it had, well, the two that I like, is it's proven to increase fibroblastic activity to synthesize collagen. Number one. Number two, it actually, you can get a thermal effect from longer, more intensity applications. So I would actually use that for deep pliability until I found short wave diathermy, which I was using. And I found that actually better. What we're doing with ultrasound now is this, and I encourage everyone to do it. And the local rep here told me this, if I took my autosound away from my therapist right now and them having used it and seen its benefits, how well it works in conjunction with doing phonophoresis or application of a med on there, and I use Dex and all sorts of things I'll use for anti-inflammation, they'd freak out because this stuff works well. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm just speaking about a heating modality, which I agree goes deep. I'm not talking about transfer as a medium, transferring a medium.
100%. Well, you know what the problem with ultrasound is, Rob, is that, and to the rest of the panel, is that to get an actual physiological effect, you need about 8 to 10 minutes. I'm not going to get into this. You need longer applications. No physio or AT wants to stand there for 10 minutes rubbing. One of the most hilarious things I've ever seen was this sports therapy documentary, and I'm not going to mention his name, and he's doing an ultrasound application on someone's lumbar spine. You're supposed to treat 2.5 times the size of that head as your treatment area. This guy's going all over the whole lumbar. He's like painting a Picasso picture with an ultrasound gel. And I think he did maybe a 3-minute treatment. Well, you're going to get a placebo. Yeah, don't even plug it in. You're going to get a better reaction out of it, right?
Yeah. Has anybody had any experience with hand cooling, like that Stanford device where they've used it for, I think it was for recovery and cramping? Erik, do you know anything about that?
I've looked into it. It's kind of like you ever see a dog step in a pool of cold water? They cool themselves to their feet.
Okay.
The idea is that if you put the hand in the cold water, the circulatory system, you're generally cooling the body through an acute area. It's kind of creepy to me. But I mean, if it works, it works. I think the literature is pretty good on it, but the application for 120 guys or 100 guys, or even a squad of 35 soccer athletes, I think it's too difficult. I like pre-cooling techniques. So like even just like those slushies, people like we always had those ready to go. and then like cooling vests, maybe if it's really, really hot. But I'll tell you this too. I think it's really good to have athletes train in really, really hot environments. I mean, the literature is really strong now. A lot of these teams in Australia that have the funds are now taking them away from altitude and bringing them like Doha and Qatar. And so I think there is a reason why teams in the South have good cardiac adaptations, blood cell volume. So like before we went to we played in Mexico City, we were having guys do sauna protocols because I know a lot of teams were using that for the Rio games. So sorry, I just went off on a tangent there, but
that's okay.
I think there's some really, I missed the boat on heat, but once again, it's target specific. You need to name the target and you try to hit the target with whatever modality you want to use.
Well, I just know that being in Canada, when I was working with track sprinters and we'd go somewhere that was, 10, 20 degrees warmer, like the times would just drop in terms of, like 100-meter times, right? Like would drop by tenths of a second easily. So, and then we'd done some work with BMX racers and they could measure output on the pedals, right? So that when they went into a colder climate, like again, 10 degrees Celsius or whatever that is in Fahrenheit, that there would be a marked, like a 20 to 30% drop in power on the pedal. So what are some ways that, if you're in a cold environment, if you're going to play at Lambeau,
hot pants, remember that with the Olympics?
Yeah. With
the British cycling team, they had them wear these pants that were, that would keep your legs really, really hot. And I actually saw thermal imaging pictures that Marco Cardinale showed that right before they would race, they took thermal imaging pictures of all the racers, and they noticed that their legs, weren't really warm. And so they started using these hot pants, and right before they get on the bike, they take them off. And I think it goes all the way back to Charlie's deal about tempo, increasing microcirculation, which heats up the motor units. So, we know that warming up again at halftime improves power output early in field sport athletes, especially like soccer athletes have some literature on that. So staying warm, you know what I'm saying? Just
yeah. Tracy, do you have hot pants?
Yeah, we had hot pants.
Yeah. Okay. And how was that done? Like I've heard that sometimes they're just built into the actual garment. It wasn't something they pulled off before they went down the hill, right? Is that true or?
No, they're
integrated.
External pants, because they can't wear those.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they have more of a skin suit. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the alpine skiers, they could sit and put the pants on over their competitive.
Okay.
And just try to stay warm. I don't know exactly how well it worked because we didn't have enough lead-in time to really study and get people to use them over time effectively, but definitely something that the winter sport athletes try to use. I don't know if the speed skaters are using them or not. That would be a little bit easier there because you're in a controlled environment.
The indoor environment. Yeah.
But definitely just trying to keep people warm on the hill is a thing. But they were not integrated into the uniform pants. It was external clothing that they had to either change into or bring extra that they had to bring with them. So
what are people's thoughts? And again, everybody can kind of contribute here. If like Erik had talked about, if you're going to be in a hot environment, are you trying to simulate those conditions in preparation to be ready for that? And conversely, if you're going to be playing in sub-zero temperatures, would you rather have people in warmer environment, indoor environment, getting ready and just being healthy, rather than saying like, we're going to put you in the snow to get you ready for it? What are people's thoughts on that, Erik?
Yeah, it's funny that you say this. There's a team I know of at the NFL. I mean, it's crazy how you can get to such a high level and do stupid stuff, but they were going to go play. They were in a cooler environment and they were going to go play in a warm environment. So the coach said, let's turn up the heat in the indoor, and just sweated the guys out all week. And they showed up completely flat because they were dehydrated. Their body, it's just like saying, it's just so stupid. If it's an acute deal, I mean, like where you got 7 days, just do your deal, train like you train. And then, wear the right appropriate garments. If it's too hot, make sure you're hydrated. If, maybe a urine analysis test would be the thing to do with somebody that's a concern, or make sure that they have the appropriate liquids. Now, if it's an Olympic scenario and you're going to the desert, or there's a world championship, or you're going to altitude, then you have a long time. But if it's like a 7 or 10 day turnover, just keep it consistent and actually make it a non-factor. Like,
that's a good point.
Who cares? We're going to go do our thing and we're going to show up and play,
Because I know somebody was telling me that the Rams wanted to prepare for Mexico City by going to Denver for a week for Kansas City. Yeah, and I'm like, knock yourself out, because I know USA Speed Skating did that before the 2014 games. We're going to go for a week at altitude. No medals when they went back to, because you're just tiring them out and they don't acclimate in 1 week. So,
and Mexico City's so much higher than Denver. And so, I mean, you can go to Denver and it's not a big deal. You go to Mexico City, we played there. I got worn out going back to the locker room. So we were just like, what can we do? Suck it up. We gave him some Beat-Elite and some other, nitrous oxide dilators. But I mean, that was it. I mean, it was like, just go out and play the game,
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that was the big takeaway, is just train as best as you can and then deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on Chris? What are you guys doing? Chris Roof, what are you doing to acclimate sometimes? What are your use of cold tubs? Do you guys use that as part of recovery? And what are some of the things that you guys have examined as part of your performance team?
Hopefully everybody can hear me. Okay, I got kids screaming and stuff in the background. So, we've used cold tubs and that's, I think I've been kind of hopped in and off of the talk here, so I missed a whole bunch there in the middle. So I don't want to repeat what anybody said. Or I know Erik mentioned earlier on about using the cold tub as a modality post game to help get a kind of super compensation effect to help calm the body back down, and gotten that from Dave Tenney, and we've used that in the past, and we're also in a, say if we're talking about a training camp scenario, we're in a hot environment, so we feel it's a priority to get our athletes cooled down as soon as we can after practice, if it's July, August, early September here. So we'll use it then as well. With in the past when I've been working with football, and I think soccer and some teams still do that as well. But
do you have any solutions for improving the Dallas Cowboys? That was a pre-meeting conversation we're having.
I don't. My pay grade's not high enough for that.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, well, I don't want to take too much more of your time. This will be a shorter one. I just want to get people's thoughts on that. There's a great Seattle LA Rams game going on right now that I want to catch the end of. So, but I don't know if anybody has any sort of closing statements on the ice cooling hot thing. I thought there were some great contributions. Rob?
Yeah, I just have a general statement. I think that if you really want to get somebody going, we're talking about heat and ice and everything else. These are modalities that are localized things. I think if you want to get somebody moving and someone ready, you have to raise their body temperature. And as Erik pointed out before, whether it's tempo or whatever it may be, you need to raise their body temperature. And you just use these other things to provide a method of trying to get to that avenue so that you can start to initiate movement, etc. But I do believe you have to raise body temperature for efficiency of training or efficiency of movement, whatever it may be. And if you're in a hot environment, like Chris said, then obviously you take precautions to cool them down. One thing Coach Parcells always said, and the Giants used to have a thing, this goes back to whether it's altitude training, the thing with the Rams, whatever, and I believe this as well, is that the New York Giants, when he was the head coach, they had something called the birthday rule. And Coach Parcells' birthday is August 22nd. So whether it was the offense or the defense, after August 22nd, no play was allowed to be put in the playbook. And the philosophy was It's not that you were going to beat us. We were going to try to beat, we were going to try to plan to beat you. This is what we're doing from August 23rd on. We're going to perfect it, and you're going to have to beat us. And so that's where I agree with Erik and yourself, whether the Rams want to go to Denver to beat somebody in Mexico City, whatever, just do what you do and do it well. And I think that's probably the best thing you can do as a team to enhance your abilities to be successful. Everything else, to me, there's so many gimmicks out there.
Oh, sorry, we lost you for a bit, Rob.
I don't know the last thing you heard me say. I just think you need to do what you do and do it well and perfect what it is that you do and see if people can beat you doing what you do instead of worrying about all this other stuff.
Hey, can I jump in just for a quick sec here?
Sounds good.
I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to just quickly. I'm not getting anything for this. A guy I met last year. Well, I've known about him for 3 years now since I read Tim Ferriss's Tool for Titans. I had the occasion to spend a day with Wim Hof, and they call him the Iceman. This guy's been up Everest in his underwear. This man knows how to control his ANS via his breathing technique and with cold exposure. And his whole thing started with him not being able to get, he was dealing with depression and altered states of mood, this and that. Anyway, he found cold to be very beneficial, cold exposure. And like you were saying, Erik, about heat, because they talk about a lot of that too. And this isn't a plug for Tools for Titans either, Ferriss's book, but there's a wealth of short bits of great information in there in how to implement this into your daily life and whatever else. But these guys are pushing the level. Wim's being studied by not SWAT. Who's the frogmen? The Navy SEALs. Like the Navy SEALs. He was on his way to University of Hawaii for them to look. He's pushing the limit in a vast majority of these cold exposure studies. They're finding out more and more and more about the beneficial aspects of cold exposure in terms of recovery and all that. We all know dopamine. You get a big rush of dopamine right away with a cold exposure, but I mean, it goes so much deeper than that. But this guy truly is on another level. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was made aware of this guy, Wim Hof, the Iceman. Wim the Iceman Hof is his name.
Awesome. I can't even put out my garbage in the morning in my underwear. So in Canada. I want to thank everybody. I just want to leave you with one final image here of this. Mine, what was it? 26 degrees in Iowa City. So, I don't know how many of you are doing that in the cold, but that seems to be the video of the day. So thank you very much. I will get you back on next week, and we'll have more people as well. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Take care, Derek. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Derek.
Happy Sunday, everyone.